All right, folks, I'm ready to get started. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the end of the 11th week together. The last time we meet before the second exam that's coming up on Tuesday, which I'm sure all of you are aware of and looking forward to. Jokes aside, you should be looking forward to it because it's just another very clear step in the road that is about to end. Like, the semester will end very soon after that. We have about roughly 5 weeks if you throw in finals in there, so not a lot of time left. And as you all know, there's going to be a lot coming up for you as far as assignments, as far as exams, finals, etc. So I hope that you will all be putting in everything you've got into these last few weeks. Just like sacrifice as much as it takes because it's worth it. It's worth your time. You will get a break. You will get a nice break. Some of you are finishing college. Congratulations on that. But the rest of you, you're going to get a nice summer break, and you'll be able to reboot and just kind of like filter out all the negative feelings that you experience as a result of having to give up fun, etc., to get all this stuff done. But it will be worth your time. So make sure that you don't relent on your dedication. Just like be all in all the time these next few weeks, and the result will be what you want it to be. It will be a good one. It will be one that you can be proud of, one that you can feel good about, one that you can reflect positively on during the summer versus being regretful, etc. So just suck it up, essentially. Suck up the feelings of wanting to give up, wanting to stop, wanting to just not do this because you signed up for it. And as soon as you sign up for something like this, it's like you have to be all in and you have to give everything you have to it. Because if not, then there's really no point in doing it. So make sure that you make it worth your while, ultimately, is what I'm trying to say here. All right, so as far as this course goes, we're going to finish off the chapter that we've been talking about, chapter 11, which has to do with monopoly. Again, it is the least competitive possible market setting that a firm can operate in. So that, again, is the other side of the spectrum. We covered the most competitive side in the perfectly competitive market chapter. And in order to analyze the decisions that these firms make, in order to understand how the markets work and how prices are set in these markets, we had to set up the framework for that kind of analysis, which involved modeling production, which involved then modeling costs, which were directly related to that. So that's where the second part of the course started and where it's taken us. This certainly isn't the end, though, of analyzing different markets. As I said, moving on beyond this chapter, we'll look at a couple of chapters having to do with oligopoly, which is markets that are the next step up from monopoly as far as being not very competitive, where there's a few firms that have large market shares that dominate the market. And then, of course, there's the monopolistically competitive case, which involves a variety of characteristics from both monopoly markets and perfectly competitive markets, sort of a hybrid version of that. So we'll be looking at that one in, I think, one chapter. And then we have a couple more chapters that we'll cover after that focus specifically on labor, like how prices are set in labor markets, how the price of labor is determined, and other issues related to that, and then finally capital. So, and then one other chapter as well, actually. So there's 5 chapters that we cover. I think the oligopoly chapter also has monopolistically competitive markets in it. Anyway, I teach a lot of different versions of this class, and the chapters are all over the place. So sometimes I get unclear as to what is what. But in the end, the material is what it is, and we have 5 chapters to go after this one. And the last 2 we cover the last week of class. I don't cover the entire chapter, just kind of pick out information from those. So as far as mini papers go, you'll be able to write one on chapter 11, then chapter 12 and chapter 13, and I think 14, and then that'll be it. So your options for mini papers are running out. There's the open chapter mini paper submission option, but that one has a deadline. Make sure you look at it and make sure you're aware of it. I'm not going to extend it. So just as far as the whole paper system goes, make sure that you are on top of it. Nothing's going to change on my part. You've understood what the nature of the system is from day one. So a lot of you I know have already finished the paper, and you'll get full credit for that. And that'll all work out for you. But for those of you that have left it till the last moment, just be very aware of the fact that you need to get this done now versus later. So as soon as you're done studying for this exam, make sure you jump on the paper and knock it out, or else it will become a problem for you. And that's silly, given that the material itself is challenging enough. You don't want the paper to be a challenge as well. Are there any questions about anything you'd like me to address before I move forward with the material? Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you extra time to work on that one, yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Well, as I said at the beginning, I don't have time to read and grade mini papers, so if you submitted them, you'll get credit for them, which I don't do until you submit your final paper. So, yeah. So, but the assignment is what it is. It's very general, and again, if you're writing economic naturalist observations and you're just using theory, all of it, or just a few pieces from each chapter to explain something, and it makes sense as far as like what you're saying, and you're using the theory correctly, then it'll be fine. That's all I'm looking for. So it's not like a very stringent set of criteria for the paper. Like it's very clear what it should be, and if it is that, then you'll get full credit for it, and that'll be it. Other questions? All right, then, yeah, so we've been talking about monopoly, so I'll just do a brief review of what we talked about last time, and then we're going to talk about the couple of sort of ancillary issues that relate to both monopoly and other market settings where firms have market power, the ability to set prices above marginal costs, which is the first thing we'll talk about is price discrimination, which basically is a situation where firms can charge different prices to different consumers. So we'll talk about how they can go about doing that, the different forms of doing that, the implications for efficiency. Won't get too specific on it, but definitely an important topic to touch upon because it's a very important result from being able to have market power, the ability to do this. And then the other thing we'll talk about is policy with respect to the natural monopoly. So I talked about last time how there's a situation where it might be normal and natural for there to only have one firm operating in a market being a monopolist, because if there's more than one, then it wouldn't be worth it for them to operate because everyone would have costs above the price they could charge. So in those situations where the conditions in the market require there to only be one firm, then that becomes a contentious issue because again, monopolists are able to charge prices higher than normal firms and normal competitive industries are able to, and that can be a problem for consumers, obviously. And so there's like a push and pull in our society with respect to like should these firms be allowed to behave like that? Well, they can only behave like that given the nature of their markets. And so then how can we resolve that? Well, we can resolve that by maybe regulating them in a variety of different ways, which we'll talk about. These are important issues. We'll lightly touch upon them here, but they are important in terms of like, the role our government plays in markets, and just a lot of sort of the stuff you'll hear in the news regarding firms trying to become bigger and ultimately have the kind of power we're talking about, the ability to set prices above the marginal cost, and how that could lead to a situation where it might require some kind of intervention by the government. So even though we talked very specifically about the natural monopoly case here, the issues that are mentioned are relevant to any case where the government is asked to get involved in markets because market power is becoming a little bit dangerous, and so it's definitely something to just kind of understand in general as just a normal, like fully functioning citizen of the society we all live in and try to maintain. Anyway, so defining monopoly, we defined it last time. We talked about how, well, monopoly in general, of course, is a market served by only one firm. We talked about last time how the definition of the market itself can sort of complicate the definition of a monopoly, and how, you know, we could use cross-price elasticities to be able to establish whether or not goods are related enough that we can maybe define a market as a particular type versus another. So the cross-price elasticity, again, is the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in price of a related good. So the percent change in the quantity demanded of peanut butter with respect to the percent change in the price of jelly. So if the price goes up for jelly and that means the quantity demanded goes down for jelly, that means that the two goods, if they're complements, which peanut butter and jelly are, will result in the quantity demanded of peanut butter also going down. So therefore, the cross-price elasticity of demand for these two goods would be negative, which means that they would be complements. I'm sorry, yeah, which means that they would be complements. But let's say we're talking about substitutes, where again, like let's say Pepsi and Coke. The price of Pepsi goes up, the quantity demanded of Coke will go up because people will jump ship from Pepsi and buy more Coke. So these will both move in the same direction. So the cross-price elasticity of demand will be positive. So that'll establish if they're substitutes. And the magnitude of the number will tell us how closely related they are, which is a number that, again, is really important when firms are trying to define their industry. So so when they maybe find themselves in some sort of litigation because government is wanting to step in and say, hey, hold on, you can't get as big as you want to get, you can't merge with these other companies to get bigger, then, you know, they can maybe argue their way out by specifying cross-price elasticities between different products to define their markets more generally rather than narrowly, in order to establish that they would have a smaller market share as a larger firm. So anyway, really important number, definitely worth understanding. All right, as far as monopoly versus perfect competition, very clearly we established that in perfectly competitive markets, individual firms set their prices at the market equilibrium price, and they can't do anything about that price, so they are price takers. So they set their profit maximizing output at the point where their price equals their marginal cost, and the demand curve that they face is a flat, perfectly elastic curve. But for a monopolist, they face a downward sloping demand curve because the market belongs to them. And so they can supply any amount, but they can only charge the price that people are willing to pay for those amounts based on the nature of the demand in those markets. So we talked about sources of monopoly, and generally, well, we call them barriers to entry. They're going to be something that's going to stop other firms from entering the industry. In this case, when a monopoly, it's going to be as extreme as possible, stopping all firms from entering an industry. So it can be because the firm controls the inputs into production. Nobody else can get the things they need to produce. Economies of scale. You have to be a certain size in order to be able to operate. So if you're big enough, you're going to be minimizing your cost of production. And other firms would need to be that big to be able to compete with you, but you know the cost of becoming that big is too big for most firms to incur, and therefore it would only allow for one firm to exist. Another implication of economies of scale is a situation where you would wind up with a natural monopoly, where let's say the amount of demand that a monopolist would supply in the market is going to be such that it is profitable because the average total cost of producing is less than the price at that level. But if another firm were to enter, they'd have to divide up the market, and they would both be operating at a loss because their average cost of producing would be above the prices they can charge. So this is the situation where you would have a natural monopoly, and And so that is what we're going to talk about at the end of today's lecture, like policy approaches to sort of controlling for that, controlling for the fact that, well, we should allow only one company to be the sole provider in those industries because it makes sense, but we shouldn't let them charge as much as they do charge. So we'll talk about how we try to go about regulating those. Of course, patents will also allow for a single seller in a market. Network economies, if the good that they sell is something that has more value as more people buy the good, that will stop other firms from getting into the market because nobody will want to buy theirs, which is what happened essentially with operating systems with Microsoft. Everybody started using Windows, and so yeah, I'm sure there were other firms trying to break into the operating system market at the beginning of the technological revolution, but Microsoft had already enjoyed the network economies enough so that they were able to get big enough to lower their average cost of production to the point where nobody could compete against them unless they were able to get that big. But they wouldn't be able to get that big because they wouldn't be able to have the kind of demand that Microsoft enjoyed from the network effects of everybody wanting to use their product versus all other operating systems mainly. And of course, government licenses or franchises, a government giving an exclusive right to a seller to buy or to sell a particular good. All right, then we talked about the profit maximizing monopolist. Of course, in this class, as is generally the case in economics, we're focused on firms maximizing profits because that's how firms are valued. We know that in perfectly competitive markets, the revenue is constant, has a constant slope, so it has a constant marginal revenue because marginal revenue equals price. But that is not the case for a monopolist who faces a downward sloping demand curve because of varying elasticity along the demand curve. That's going to lead to either increasing or decreasing total revenues depending on whether demand is elastic or inelastic, and revenues will be maximized at the point where demand is unit elastic. This is the elasticity measure down here. So you're going to get a hump-shaped total revenue curve with a maximum in a market that has market power, essentially. This is a characteristic of all markets that have market power: monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopolies. So again, they want to maximize their profits. They're going to set their output at the point where their total costs and their revenues are furthest apart. And it happens to be that at that point, the slopes of the two curves are equal. So the marginal revenue, the slope of the revenue curve, is equal to the marginal cost at the profit maximizing level. So that's the rule that the monopolist follows to optimize their profits. The monopolist maximizes profits by choosing the level of output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So the marginal revenue is, as we know, constant for a perfectly competitive market because everybody's a price taker. The extra revenue they gain from selling additional units is the price. So marginal revenue equals price, so they set price equal to marginal cost to set their optimal level of output in those markets. But a monopolist has a marginal revenue that's less than price, and that is again because they face a downward sloping demand curve. They don't face that perfectly elastic flat demand curve, which means that as they increase their output, they're going to lose some money from lowering the price on existing units that are being sold. But of course, they're going to benefit from selling additional units. So they're going to get extra revenue from selling additional units, which is the quantity effect of a price change. But they're going to lose some revenues, which is the price effect of a price change. But if demand is elastic, then the quantity effect outweighs the price effect and marginal revenue is positive. When demand is elastic, unit elastic, the two effects exactly cancel each other out and marginal revenue is equal to zero. And then beyond that point, the quantity effect is outweighed by the price effect, so marginal revenue is negative, which is why you get that negatively sloping part of the total revenue curve. So that's that downward sloping part of that hump-shaped revenue curve. So then marginal revenue looks like this, and it is, again, less than price. And it so happens that marginal revenue has twice the slope in absolute value of the demand curve. When we're looking at linear demand curves, it's just a mathematical property. And the horizontal intercept is half the intercept of the demand curve. As far as maximizing their profits, again, their optimality condition is to set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So here's their marginal revenue. We throw in the marginal cost curve. Again, that's swoosh-shaped marginal cost because there's increasing returns to labor first and then decreasing returns to labor. They happen to cross here at this point. So again, they set their profit maximizing level of output at the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost over the increasing range of marginal cost. So again, any point over here, you've got marginal revenue. That's greater than marginal cost, so it makes sense for them to supply more. And beyond that point, marginal cost exceeds marginal revenue. Doesn't make sense for them to go further than this point. So that's definitely the point they want to operate at. Once they figure out how much they're going to sell in order to maximize their profits, maximize that distance between their total revenue and their cost curve, they have to figure out what price to charge. So then they go up to the demand curve to figure out what people are willing to pay for that quantity. So that's the price they wind up charging. And once they realize that, they have to figure out if they're making profits or not. And that's where the average total cost curve comes in. That tells them how much on average it costs them to produce at the profit maximizing level. And so the difference between the price and the average total cost times the quantity is the profits of the monopolist. Now, it's not guaranteed that monopolists will make profits. It depends on the position of their average total cost curve relative to, again, the profit maximizing level of output. So in this case, obviously price is above it, so there are profits. A monopolist may decide to shut down if they're making losses in the short run. They would be making losses if the average total cost curve was above the demand curve. But again, like in a perfectly competitive market where the firm decides to shut down, if the price falls below the shutdown price, which is the minimum of the average variable cost curve, similar to that condition that establishes the shutdown condition for the perfectly competitive firm, the monopolist has a shutdown condition, and that is they'll shut down if their average variable cost curve is completely above the demand curve. But unlike a perfectly competitive firm, there is no actual clear supply curve because there's no clear relationship between quantity supplied and price. So monopolists face a supply rule that is based on the fact that they set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So we don't see an actual supply curve in these markets. In the long run, in perfectly competitive markets, if there are economic profits being made, firms will enter the industry, shift the supply curve to the right, lower the equilibrium price, and erode those profits. So there will be zero economic profits in the long run. If firms are making losses in the short run, the supply curve will shift to the left, which will raise the equilibrium price. And so remaining firms will have their price then be raised to the minimum of the average total cost curve, the break-even price. And they will also be making zero economic profit. So regardless of what happens in the short run in perfectly competitive markets, either economic losses or profits, in the long run, there will be zero economic profits in those markets. That is not the case for a monopolist. A monopolist doesn't face free entry and exit as perfectly competitive firms do. So again, there are barriers to entry. They're stopping other firms from entering the market in the short run or the long run, whatever. Firms cannot enter the market. That's why there's only one firm dominating the market. Because of that, economic profits will persist in the long run. So monopolists will be able to make economic profits in the long run. As far as efficiency goes, as far as like how well the markets are operating, the markets can operate the best possible in perfectly competitive settings where the producer surplus and the consumer surplus are at their maximum. And so again, this supply and demand framework that you've been studying your entire lives, essentially at this point, I'm sure it feels that way, is a model of perfect competition. And and when you first learned consumer and producer surplus, you were looking at the most efficient result possible. And then that supply curve that you saw in that perfectly competitive market was the sum of the individual firms' supply curves that are their marginal cost curves above the minimum of their average variable costs. And so the sum of those, so that's what that's telling us there. Anyway, so in perfectly competitive markets, you're going to get the best outcome possible. As many transactions as could happen will happen, and everybody's happy. But when you have a monopolist is able to take advantage of the fact that they have market power and are able to charge a price above their marginal cost. And so you will have what's called deadweight loss, the loss in consumer and producer surplus. So you'll have a loss of efficiency, which reflects the fact that there are mutually beneficial transactions that would occur in a perfectly competitive market where firms would set their price at equal to marginal cost, that do not occur because, again, the monopolist is able to set a price above their marginal cost. So we have a loss of efficiency in these markets, which hurts society. Obviously, society is helped by the fact that the profits that are earned by monopolists, but the net result is negative for society as a whole. But for the firms themselves, obviously, they do get to benefit from their monopoly power. And then we looked at how we can calculate the deadweight loss in the very simple case where you have linear marginal cost and linear demand, and therefore linear marginal revenue. It's going to be, again, the area of this triangle. The height of the triangle is the difference between the top of the triangle, which is at the point where price equals marginal cost, which is the competitive quantity that would be transacted, minus the bottom of the triangle, which is the monopoly quantity. So that gives you the height of the triangle. The base of the triangle is given by the difference between the monopoly price and the marginal revenue for the monopolist quantity. All right, so that's what we covered last time. Let's move forward now with today's lecture. Let's talk about price discrimination, the ability to charge different prices to different consumers. So there's 3 different cases we'll consider. So higher profits under price discrimination may actually end up improving this efficiency, as the monopolist is able to expand output toward the level at which demand intersects marginal cost. So that loss of efficiency that we saw was a result of the monopolist charging a single price. But if they do take advantage of their market power and do choose to price discriminate, then they actually do move the market towards a more efficient level. Of course, they do wind up capturing the consumer surplus that is lost. It's not like it goes back to consumers. Ultimately, their purpose is to charge everybody as much as people are willing to pay for the good. So their reservation price, they're trying to basically make everybody pay their reservation price. Obviously, it's a very tricky thing. So there's different ways that they go about trying to do this. So before we talk about those different ways, let's just talk about an example of selling in different markets. So if the monopolist is maximizing profits, her marginal revenue should be the same in each market. So she's going to have a marginal cost of producing, and she may be selling in 2 different markets. This may be like Los Angeles, and this might be Tokyo. Who knows? They're 2 different markets. Generally, thinking of them in 2 different geographic areas is a good way of thinking about it. Each of those places is going to have different demand and therefore different marginal revenues. So if the marginal cost is less than marginal revenue in one place but equal to marginal revenue in the other, then they would want to continue selling in the one place where marginal revenue exceeds marginal cost until they equal each other, or vice versa. If it was the opposite case where, let's say, marginal revenue was above marginal cost here and marginal revenue equaled marginal cost here, they'd want to sell more here until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So ultimately, for the monopolist that sells in different markets to maximize their profits, they want to make sure that the marginal revenue in each market equals the marginal cost of producing the units that they're selling. So here is one market, here's the other. Here is the sum of the marginal revenue curves. And the optimal point of supply for this monopolist is the point where marginal cost equals the sum of the marginal revenues, which equals 10. So at that point, marginal cost is going to be equal to this. So then we can look at where that marginal cost hits each of the marginal revenue curves in the individual markets, and that's going to dictate how much should be sold in those markets. So in this one, there should be 6 units sold. In this one, there should be 4 units sold. Practice problem. A monopolist has marginal costs. Let's say marginal cost equals some quantity QT, so that's the marginal cost. That's a derivative of the total cost function, is just QT. And the T represents the total quantity. And the home market demand, so they sell in the home market and they sell in the foreign market. In the home market demand, they face a downward sloping demand. So those are the inverse demand function for the home market. That's what the H is for. The monopolist can also sell to a foreign market at a constant price. So in the foreign market, they operate in a competitive market, in a perfectly competitive market. Everybody's charging the same price. They are price takers. They cannot charge a different price. So marginal revenue is constant in the foreign market. It's equal to 12. But marginal revenue is not constant in the home market. So we're to find the quantity produced, quantity sold in the quantity produced in total, the quantity sold in the home market, the quantity sold in the foreign market, and the price charged in the home market. And we have to explain why the monopolist's profit would fall if it were to produce the same quantity but sell more in the home market. All right, so the marginal revenue equation in the home market is equal to what? 30 minus 2QH, exactly. We just double the slope in absolute value of our inverse demand function to get to the marginal revenue function. It's just, again, a mathematical result from having linear demand. So 30 minus 2QH is the marginal revenue in the home market. The profit maximizing level of output for the monopolist selling to segmented markets is equal to the sum of the marginal revenues set equal to the marginal cost. The horizontal sum of the marginal revenues across markets is the home marginal revenue function, which is this one here, up to the home output, where marginal revenue at home equals the marginal revenue in the foreign market, and then the foreign marginal revenue function, which equals 12 for any further units beyond that. So remember, they're setting marginal cost equal to marginal revenue in both markets, which means that they're ultimately setting marginal revenue equal to each other as well in those markets. So marginal cost equals QT. And again, this is what the condition they're following. Marginal revenue in the foreign market equals 12, so that's that also equals QT. Setting 12 equal to QT again is them basically setting the perfectly competitive profit maximizing condition. They again set marginal revenue. They set marginal cost equal to price, which is equal to marginal revenue, which is constant in the foreign market. So the total produced here is going to be 12. So here is the marginal revenue in the home market. Here's the marginal revenue in the foreign market, which is constant. So we're looking at the quantity sold in the home market, quantity sold in the foreign market, and the price charged in the home market. So the marginal revenue in the home market, as we know, is equal to 30 minus 2QH, which is this line here. Set that equal to marginal cost, which is equal to QT, which we know also is equal to 12. And so that's going to be 30 minus 2QH equals 12. And then we can solve for QH by doing some algebra here. Subtract 30 from both sides, divide both sides by -2. So the home market quantity winds up being 9 units here. And then the foreign amount is going to be the total minus the home market amount, which is going to be equal to 3 units there. So again, like they're setting their marginal revenue equal to their marginal costs, and the marginal revenue has to be, again, the sum of the marginal revenue curve, so it's going to be kind of kinked there. So the amount they're going to sell is going to, up until 9 units, is going to correspond to that marginal revenue in the home market, and then beyond that, it's going to correspond to the marginal revenue in the foreign market. So then at that point, that tells us the total amount they're selling. This tells us So that establishes basically the marginal cost that they're going to sell at, and then setting that equal to this marginal revenue curve, which we've done here, gets us to the 9 units, which is what we solve for here, and then subtracting the 9 from the 12 gets us to the 3 units, which is how much they sell in the foreign market. So the home price, what they're going to charge at home, is going to then be determined by the amount that people are willing to pay in the home market, because again, the home market is the market they have monopoly power in, and so they are able to set a price, whereas in the foreign market they are price takers and they just charge $12. So in the home market, that's the last part that we're trying to solve for. We plug in the home amount, which is equal to 9, and then of course you just solve for the $21, which is what they wind up paying there. Once having established how much they're going to supply, which is 9, they go up to the demand curve to figure out what people are willing to pay for it. And then finally, we're to explain why the monopolist profits would fall if they were to produce the same quantity but sell more in the home market. Well, if they were to produce the same quantity but sell more in the home market, that means that in the home market they would be basically getting to the point where their marginal revenue would be less than the marginal revenue they could earn from additional units they could sell in the foreign market. So before that, the marginal revenue is above it, so obviously they want to sell in the foreign market first, because they'd make more money than they would if they sold in the foreign market. But once the marginal revenue hits the foreign market's marginal revenue, then they don't want to sell more units, because then they would make less per unit than they would in the foreign market. So in the end, they maximize their profits at the point where the marginal revenues in both markets are equal to the marginal costs of producing in total. And so it's going to be the point where the marginal revenues are equal to each other. Anyway, it's a little bit muddied, this example, so don't worry too much about actually learning this particular one. We'll do a more clear-cut one in a second. But this is just meant to highlight some of the issues and also kind of give you a little bit more intuition about what's actually happening graphically. All right, so selling more than 9 units at home would yield less marginal revenue than the units sold overseas, lowering overall profits. All right, so charging $21 at home and $12 overseas is an example of what's called third-degree price discrimination. Third-degree price discrimination involves charging different prices to buyers in completely different markets. So when we say completely different markets, we're generally talking about like geographically different markets, but you could be thinking about a situation where like you're selling, let's say, pizzas to senior citizens versus students. So those can be considered different markets as well, because you'd have, certain criteria for each group being able to establish, their age, and therefore they would have a completely different demand curve that essentially would embody how much they're willing to pay at different prices. But I mean, the clearest cut example is thinking of it in terms of geography. All right, so price discrimination is possible, feasible, only when it is impossible or at least impractical for buyers to trade amongst themselves. So that's a necessary condition for third-degree price discrimination in general to be able to happen. People shouldn't be able to buy things at a low price and sell them at a higher price, which is called arbitrage, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with that term. The purchase of something for costless, risk-free resale at a higher price. So Economic Naturalist 11.2 kind of highlights the nature of arbitrage and how it can be a problem for third-degree price discrimination. So the question is, why do theater owners offer student discounts on admission tickets but not on popcorn? So arbitrage is practical in some cases but not in others. If theater operators attempted to sell popcorn for $1 to students and $3 to adults, then some enterprising student would seize the arbitrage opportunity, selling popcorn to disgruntled adults for maybe only $2, right? Like they'll buy a bunch of popcorn, go to the bathroom, set up a stand in one of the stalls, and maybe turn a profit. I could see somebody taking advantage of that. Under the pressure of competition from the arbitrageurs, the theater now being faced with competition by these people that are trying to flip the popcorn, the price differential would fall until the price differential was barely sufficient to make it worth the student's while to engage in the transaction. So the theater would have to lower its price because it would be competing against the students, right? So essentially that highlights the nature of why it is important and a necessary condition for price discrimination to work, that people are not able to buy at the lower price and sell in the higher price. So the markets need to be distinguished from each other enough so that is impossible. Obviously, geography is a good way of establishing that, for things that are perishable, at least. But there are other ways of doing so, and of course, it's particular to each context that it happens in. All right, now let's do a clear-cut example of third-degree price discrimination. Suppose a monopolist sells in two separate markets with demand curves given by P1 equals 10 minus Q1 and P2 equals 20 minus Q2. So again, those inverse demand functions represent demand in different markets. They could be different geographic areas, whatever. Her total cost curve is given by 5 plus 2Q. What quantities should she sell and what prices should she charge in two markets? All right, so now remember, we need to set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost in each market. What is marginal cost? It's equal to 2, right? All right, what is the equation for marginal revenue in the first market? 10 minus 2Q1, right? And what is the marginal revenue equation here? Right, 20 minus 2Q2 is the marginal revenue there. Again, we're just doubling the slope in absolute value. It's just a shortcut. If you know it, you can use it. The other way is just to multiply your inverse demand function times quantity, get to your total revenue function, take the derivative, get to your marginal revenue, which will do the exact thing that we just did by just doubling the slope in absolute value. So I would recommend the latter. Or the former is actually what I meant. All right. All right, so marginal cost equals 2. So here is our marginal revenue, 10 minus 2Q1. Set that equal to marginal cost 2. And do a little bit of algebra. And we see that in the first market, they should supply 4 units. How are we going to figure out how much they should charge? Not into total cost. That tells us how much the total cost of producing 4 is. Right, into our inverse demand function for the first market, right? So that's what we'll do to get the price, but let's get the quantity in the second market first. So again, getting to our marginal revenue, doubling the slope in absolute value, setting it equal to marginal cost will allow us to solve for it, which is equal to 9 in this case. Just doing some algebra there. And again, just to figure out the prices, you plug in each quantity into the respective demand. Inverse demand functions. So in the first market, we get $6 by plugging in Q equals 4 here. And in the second market, we get $11 by plugging in 9 into our second inverse demand function. Third degree price discrimination. Any questions on this example? All right. So that's essentially what we did there. We set our marginal cost, which is constant, equal to the sum of our marginal revenues, which is essentially us setting marginal cost equal to marginal revenue in each of our segmented markets. And so we got, again, marginal cost equals 2 equal to marginal revenue in the first market to dictate that this firm should sell 4 units there to maximize profits there. Sell 9 units here by setting marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. And then again, to figure out prices, we went up to the demand curve to figure out each price. They should charge $11 in this market and $6 in that market. Price discriminating in the third degree. Third degree price discrimination, charging different prices in different markets. All right, let's talk about first degree price discrimination, also known as the perfectly discriminating monopolist. So first degree price discrimination means charging every consumer's reservation price individually from all other consumers in the market. So somehow being able to figure out how much every single person is willing to pay and then actually being able to charge them that amount. If a monopolist is forced to charge a single price for all units, then the shaded triangle would be consumer surplus. So here's the demand curve. This is, let's say, the price that they would charge to everybody. And so, of course, the difference between everybody's reservation price and the price that they have to pay is their consumer surplus. Added up amongst all consumers, you get this area under the triangle, which is, again, the efficiency of the market that one gains from the demand side. And so this would belong to consumers. This is their excess willingness to pay. But if the monopolist is somehow able to figure out how much each and every consumer is willing to pay, then they can take that consumer surplus for themselves, which they do, but not to such an extreme as we see in perfect price discrimination, because it's nearly impossible to find a case in which firms are actually able to do that. And if you can figure it out, I'm sure you'll make a lot of money. I mean, that's a rough one. That's a rough one because somehow.
If you currently buy a certain product, they'll change the price.
Right.
And then the company who's producing it will pay the
I mean, I've been noticing that on Amazon, because in Amazon it's easy, right? Because obviously there aren't prices on shelves or whatever. So yeah, I've been noticing if I'm buying something a lot on Amazon, like over time it'll slightly start to go up the price. Yeah, I mean that's something we could debate, but I mean it's not illegal. You know, they can do it. So it's up to us to decide if we want to keep buying from them or not. Like whenever I see that happening, I'll stop buying from them and I'll immediately do a search and try to find somebody else to buy the thing from. But yeah, that is a way of sort of trying to achieve that, just kind of inching up the price and seeing where people will stop buying something. Anyway, ideally, what they're trying to do is get every single person's willingness to pay and be able to extract the entire consumer surplus. So under first-degree price discrimination, the consumer pays the maximum he would be willing to pay for each unit and as a result receives no surplus. Since marginal revenue is the same as demand in that case, then Q star would be the optimal amount to produce. So if the firm is able to perfectly price discriminate, then their marginal revenue would be equal to marginal cost at the demand curve. Marginal revenue would not be less than the demand curve, and therefore this would be the profit maximizing level of output. And so they'd be able to capture the entire consumer surplus, and at that profit maximizing level of output, their average cost of producing is below the average cost, the average price they're getting, and so then they would even have profit. So then the consumer surplus is basically more profits for them. Price discriminating monopolist produces more than a normal monopolist, though, and that's sort of the sort of mitigating circumstance. It's the thing that kind of makes a discriminating monopolist a relatively good thing. Like, yeah, they're the only seller and they're able to use market power to sell above their price, but they are able to extinguish some of that deadweight loss that we see by capturing some of that surplus for themselves. But nonetheless, they are capturing it as profit, which is increasing, the efficiency overall for society because they are part of society. And so it does improve market outcomes when they do that in terms of just efficiency. Not equity, not fairness, but efficiency. So the perfect price discriminator is a theoretical case that is rarely seen in practice. Some service-related businesses, including car dealers, mechanics, doctors, lawyers, do successfully practice a form of first-degree price discrimination. So most car dealers will post stickers, prices on their cars that are well above the dealer's actual marginal cost, but then offer discounts to customers on a case-by-case basis, right? Sort of allowing you to kind of talk them down a bit to the point that you're willing to pay, thereby allowing you to reveal what your reservation price is for the car, therefore getting you to pay your reservation price for the car. Therefore, perfectly price discriminating, also known as first-degree price discrimination. So the best salespersons are able to size up customers to determine the minimum discount necessary to get them to drive away the car. Same thing again, mechanics, lawyers, doctors, anyone that doesn't have like a fixed price that they have to adhere to can sort of play with pricing in that way to be able to try to extract as much consumer surplus as possible. And then the third case is called second-degree price discrimination. Second-degree price discrimination involves charging a menu of prices that decreases as quantity bought increases. So you basically say, well, if you buy 3 units, you pay $3, but if you buy 10 units, you get to pay $2, etc. Like just basically providing you a set of options that relate quantities to prices. And so, that will help to capture some consumer surplus, not all of it, but let's say the price of the single price monopolist charges was P3, then this entire area would be the consumer surplus. But if they're able to pick people that are willing to pay a higher price for a smaller quantity and a lower price for a bigger quantity, then they're able to capture some of that surplus that they were not able to capture with a single price, and so they do extract some of it. So it does increase the market efficiency somewhat. Second-degree price discrimination, which again involves offering a menu of prices. So first-degree price discrimination, perfect price discrimination, charging everybody what they can pay. Second-degree price discrimination, you set up a menu of prices and people just pick and choose. Third-degree price discrimination, you have very specific different prices for different markets. So in electric utility, many electric utilities employ what are called declining tail block rate structures, by which the first 300 kilowatt hours per month are billed, let's say, at 10 cents each, and the next 700 are 8 cents, and all quantities over 1,000 are 5 cents each. So that's like an example of the menu of prices, a second-degree price discrimination. All right, so just highlighting the efficiency loss from monopoly and how that's actually improved with price discrimination. So consider a monopolist with constant long-run average cost and marginal cost. So here's their long-run average cost curve, which means that, and it's constant. So their marginal cost is also constant. This is just to simplify the nature of the efficiency loss or gain. So the single price monopolist would set their optimal level here. Charge this price here, and so this would be the consumer surplus under the single price monopolist. This would be their profits, the difference between their price and the average cost of producing times the quantity, and this would be, of course, the deadweight loss, because in a competitive market, prices would be set equal to marginal costs. So then they would supply here. The perfectly competitive outcome would be here, and this entire amount would be consumer surplus. And so single price monopolists would cause deadweight loss, but again, that could be improved with price discrimination. And again, that means that the producer is capturing the producer surplus, but it is not deadweight loss in that case. It is going somewhere. That extra willingness to pay is being manifested in the form of profit for firms. All right, let's talk about public policy toward natural monopoly. So again, natural monopoly exists when you have a situation where it makes sense for there to be only one firm operating, because the amount they would sell, if it were to be divided by 2, would cause both of them to charge a price that's below their average cost of production. They need to be bigger and move along their average total cost curve to have the lower costs to be able to then operate profitably. So there's 2 objections to the equilibrium price-quantity pair of the single price natural monopolist that would exist. The first is the fairness objection, which is that the producer earns an economic profit, that they have the ability to exist as a natural monopoly, and the government is allowing them to do so. But like, given that circumstance, they're also benefiting greater than, just a firm that operates in a normal market that would make 0 economic profit in the long run. So the fact that they're able to make profits and for those to persist into the long run is the first objection that most people raise for natural monopolists. The second one is, of course, the efficiency objection, which is that the price is above the marginal cost. That results in the loss in consumer surplus. So the fact that there is deadweight loss as a result of the natural monopolists being able to operate in the way that they are able to as a firm that has market power. So policymakers may respond in a variety of ways to the fairness and the efficiency objections. So one approach is for the firms to just be taken over by the state, for the state to completely run the firms. Obviously, that would solve a couple of the problems that we just talked about, but it might create further problems. It's important for the government to be involved in markets, but the degree to which they should be involved in markets is sort of a murky sort of area. It's not exactly known what is the best amount that governments should be involved, but definitely completely running firms themselves can be problematic. We saw the extreme case in the Soviet Union, which was a complete command economy where the government essentially ran the economy, made decisions of how much everything was produced and who got what and what was produced. And ultimately, what we saw there is that corruption seeped in, and the systems weren't efficient. There were too much of things being produced that people didn't need, and there weren't enough of things being produced that people did need. So there were like long lines for bread and milk, things of that sort, basic necessities. So definitely, there is a middle ground. Of course, not having any government involved at all is problematic because you see of the efficiency loss that can result from firms just getting as big as possible to be able to have as much market power as possible, to raise prices as much as they want, and who gets hurt? Consumers, of course, from that. So without any government intervention, that is the result. So that is where the markets are heading. But then, of course, they can head the other way with the command economy case, and that's why the middle ground is such a sort of tenuous point to kind of establish. And even when you do establish it, it's really unclear if it's the right one or not. So that's where economic analysis comes in and informs policymakers, and a lot of the analysis that's done about individual industries plays a big role, because you can't have sort of a blanket rule because all industries are different. There's different characteristics of different industries, and so it's just a really tough sort of thing. And so for anybody to be like black and white about the issue, to say, well, there should be no government involved, or the government should run the economy, that is ridiculous. But it should also be acknowledged that like the middle ground is a tough place to get to, and that really requires our political institutions and our experts to be able to kind of try to work through the complex issues and get to the best sort of results. All right, so as far as like the state management and ownership of the firms, private firms are not able to charge prices less than their average cost and remain in business in the long run. So state firms are able to do that. So sometimes you will have a natural monopolist that maybe does have to operate at a loss, and they wouldn't be able to. So therefore, it makes sense for like a government agency to basically run those type of firms. It's been argued that the U.S. Postal Service is one of these, but there's also a lot of evidence to suggest that it could be running better, and their costs could actually be minimized, and so it's a murky area. You can't really make an easy determination about that. Single price firms, a single price firm has no alternative but to charge more than marginal cost when we're talking about having any kind of market power in a natural monopoly situation. State ownership resolves the issue, but causes new ones. So again, state ownership does resolve the issue of maybe having to operate at a loss, or the fact that there's an efficiency loss. But if the state owns the firms, it may weaken incentives for cost-conscious, efficient management. So everything we've been talking about is predicated on the idea that the firms are being managed to the most efficient extent, where the capital and the labor are being chosen to minimize costs, and the capital and labor is working on the production function. But if you're not actually, if workers and your resources aren't being used to the point where you're actually operating on the production function for your firm, then really it all kind of goes out the window, everything we've been talking about, because again, that it's all based on the notion that production tells us something about costs. So this is what's called X inefficiency, a condition in which a firm fails to obtain maximum output from a given combination of inputs. And that is a problem that could happen with state ownership, and that is really what happened in the Soviet Union. The next option for the government, if they are not to go to such an extreme extent as to try to own these firms and operate them themselves, is just to regulate the private monopolies. So there's different types of regulation they could engage in. One is called the rate of return regulation. So the main form of government price regulation employed in the United States, in which prices are set to allow the firm to earn a predetermined rate of return on its investment capital. So they get a certain amount of return based on how much they put in, essentially. Ideally, this rate of return would allow the firm to recover exactly their opportunity cost of its capital and therefore earn zero economic profit, and therefore be as efficient as possible. A potential problem, though, is that regulatory commissions can never be certain about what the competitive rate of return will be in any given period. They just don't have enough insight into the markets to be able to identify like what that would be. Also, two distortions can arise from the rate of return discrepancy between the allowed rate of return and the actual cost of capital. One is called the gold-plated water cooler effect. So the regulated monopolist has an incentive to purchase more capital equipment than it actually needs in order to produce a given level of output, in order to be able to get a bigger return on their capital. So they, again, the amount they could earn is based on how much they've put in, so they end up putting in more so they can earn more. The other distortion is the cross-subsidy effect. So this is specific to a monopolist who serves more than one market, in which the allowed rate of return exceeds the cost of capital, creating an incentive to sell below cost in the more elastic market. So in the more elastic market, the market where people are more sensitive to prices, they would charge lower prices and operate at a loss there. And they would cross-subsidize the resulting losses by selling above cost in the less elastic markets where consumers are less sensitive to price changes. So they would charge higher prices in those markets, and therefore make up for the amount that they are losing in these markets. But by doing so, they increase the amount that they're selling, which means they require more capital. So the idea is that the below cost price in the elastic market will boost sales by more than the above cost price in the less elastic market curtails them. So the resulting increase in output increases the requirement for capital to produce it, and hence increases profits allowed by regulation. So by doing that, they're able to establish that they need to have more capital and therefore be able to earn more money. All right, so another sort of approach is to just give exclusive contracting for a natural monopolist, which might involve a bidding war. So a public contract would be bid on and then be given to the lowest bidder. So that's a way of sort of getting them to minimize their costs as much as possible, and therefore ultimately getting us to lower prices. But obviously we see that that is not the case with crony capitalism. These contracts are generally given out to friends of whomever, and so these contracts aren't always given out to the lowest bidder. They're given out to the friends of the people who are able to give out the contracts. So the detail of the contracts may get too complicated, and thus making it equivalent to direct regulation. That's another thing that could arise, like just the fact that the government would have to get really involved in these contracts to make sure that all stipulations are covered so that firms don't find loopholes that they're able to exploit, etc., which of course also raises costs because they have to involve lawyers, which costs money. Vigorous enforcement of antitrust laws is another option. So we've got the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, which makes it illegal to monopolize or attempt to monopolize any part of the trade or commerce amongst the several states. We've got the Clayton Act of 1914, one of whose provisions prevents corporations from acquiring shares in a competitor where the effect would be to substantially lessen competition or create a monopoly. The Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission are tasked with monitoring firm mergers that may consolidate market shares too much to the point where monopoly power can result. There have been two different attempts by healthcare companies to merge in the last couple of months that were stopped by the government, fortunately. Again, because of laws like these antitrust laws that we have that stop the firms from getting too big. But again, enforcing the antitrust laws is very expensive because, again, like the firms, you generally will have a lot of money and they'll be able to hire very clever lawyers and you know, there's all sorts of clever legal tactics that can be applied that can, you know, work through some loopholes and get firms to the point where they're able to consolidate power. So antitrust policies impede all consolidations, even those that would lead to substantial reduction in costs. And finally, the last option is just laissez-faire policy towards monopoly, which is not get involved at all. Just let them do whatever they want to do. And that's obviously the perspective of certain people in our government right now. And that may be why we will see a lot more consolidation happen in the future, as well as not much regulation of existing natural monopolies. All right, let's just do one more practice problem. We'll call it a day, folks. So a monopolist has the demand curve, P equals 100 minus Q, and a long-run cost curve of 20Q. What is the marginal revenue function? 100 minus 2Q is correct. What is the profit maximizing quantity? How do we find that? Equal to 20, because that's our marginal cost, right? So doing some algebra there will get us to our optimal quantity of 40. What is the profit maximizing price? How do we get that? Very good. So plugging that in gets us to the price for the monopolist, which is 60 bucks. What would be the perfectly competitive price and quantity in the long run if all firms had the same long run total cost curve as the monopolist? So remember, in the long run, the price is equal to marginal cost is equal to what else for a perfectly competitive firm? No. Well, price equals marginal revenue, right? But in the long run, it also equals something else. Remember, there's zero economic profits in those industries, so that means that what has to be equal to price as well? How do we determine profits once the profit maximizing level of output has been determined? We look at what type of cost of production. That's the price of the labor, so the total cost, right? So we look at the average cost, right? The average total cost. In the long run, it's just average cost. So the price would have to equal average cost, right? So what is our average cost here of production? It's 20, right? Right, it's just the long run cost divided by Q. So again, the long run equilibrium price in a perfectly competitive industry occurs at the minimum of the long run average cost curve. Our long run average cost curve is just constant, so the minimum is just 20 and it's constant. All right, so therefore the long run equilibrium price in a perfectly competitive market occurs at the point where price equals average cost, which is equal to 20. So working that out, that gets us to the competitive quantity to be, in this case, 80. And then you can get the price by plugging that into, of course, our inverse demand function. And finally, what is the size of the efficiency loss from monopoly? So again, we're looking at calculating the deadweight loss. So we have to calculate the triangle that we looked at a couple of times. So again, the height of the triangle is the difference between the quantity, the competitive quantity minus the monopoly quantity. And then the base of the triangle is determined by the monopoly price and the marginal revenue of the monopolist. And so the marginal revenue of the monopolist at 40 units is equal to 20. So we've got a monopolist price of 60. We've got a marginal revenue of 20. And then we've got a competitive quantity of 80 and a monopoly quantity of 40. And that gets us to a deadweight loss of 800 bucks. All right, folks, we're done. We're done with the second part of the course. Congratulations. I'm sure you're ecstatic about it. Work really hard this weekend. Like really, really, really hard. It's worth your time. Just do it and just come in here and just do really well on Tuesday. It'll be so sweet. You'll love it. Have a good day. Have a good day. I'll see you on Tuesday.